The official story is straightforward. Urban planning in the 19th century followed population growth. Cities expanded as people arrived. Infrastructure followed demand. But in 1837, the city of Chicago laid out a street grid for 400,000 residents when fewer than 4,000 people lived there. In 1811, New York's Commissioner's Plan mapped 155 streets and 12 avenues across Manhattan, most of it farmland, forest, and swamp. The grid extended miles beyond any existing settlement. It anticipated a population that wouldn't materialize for decades. Philadelphia, Detroit, Washington, D.C., San Francisco before the gold rush. The pattern doesn't break. The grids came first. This is a documentary examination of infrastructure timing, a look at urban systems that appeared before the populations they were designed to serve. The evidence comes from city records, surveyor maps, and construction timelines. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's an observation about scale, sequence, and preparation. The standard explanation is economic optimism. Cities planned ahead. Surveyors anticipated growth. Developers speculated on future value. And that explanation works until you look at how far ahead some of these grids were laid. Chicago in the 1830s was a settlement on the edge of a swamp. The Erie Canal had just opened. The first railroads were years away. There was no industrial base, no harbor infrastructure, no reason to believe the population would explode. Yet the grid was already there. Street names, block dimensions, right-of-way measurements, all of it drawn, recorded, and legally filed before the demand existed. The same thing happened in Detroit. In 1805, a fire destroyed most of the settlement. Judge Augustus Woodward designed a new street plan, a radial grid inspired by Washington, D.C. The plan covered an area vastly larger than the population required. Most of it stayed empty for decades. The infrastructure was ready. The people were not. New York's 1811 grid is the clearest example. The commissioner's plan didn't just extend beyond the city, it extended beyond the concept of the city. In 1811, New York's built environment stopped around 14th Street. The plan mapped streets to 155th Street. That's over 140 blocks of nothing. No buildings. No residents. Just surveyor stakes and legal boundaries. The grid was implemented anyway. Streets were cut. Elevations were flattened. Hills were removed. The natural topography of Manhattan was reshaped to fit a grid that no one was using. What? The official answer is speculation. Landowners wanted property values tied to a future city. Developers needed clear parcels. The grid made land sellable. But the scale doesn't match the economy. New York in 1811 had around 100,000 people. The grid was designed for over 1 million. That's not speculation. That's something else. Washington, D.C. is another case. Pierre Charles L'Enfant's 1791 plan laid out a capital city for a government that barely existed. The federal apparatus was small. Congress met sporadically. The population was under 10,000. L'Enfant's design included wide diagonal avenues, ceremonial plazas, and monumental spaces. It assumed a scale of governance and population that wouldn't arrive for a century. The streets were built anyway. Most of them led to empty land. For decades, Washington was described as a city of magnificent distances, a phrase that meant the distances between buildings, not monuments. The infrastructure was there. The city was not. San Francisco followed the same pattern. Before the gold rush, Jasper O'Farrell surveyed a street grid in 1847. The population was around 800 people. The grid covered thousands of acres. Within 2 years, the gold rush hit. The population exploded. And the grid was already waiting. That timing feels convenient, but it also feels prepared. Across the United States and the United Kingdom, this pattern repeats. Grids were laid in advance. Streets were named before construction. Infrastructure appeared ahead of need. In some cases, decades ahead. Liverpool expanded its dock system in the early 1800s with capacity far beyond its shipping volume. Manchester's canal network was over-engineered for the industrial output of the time. Glasgow's tenement districts were designed with population densities that didn't exist yet. The systems were ready. The demand caught up later. The standard explanation is industrial optimism. The 19th century believed in progress. Cities planned big because they expected growth. But the consistency is striking. It's not just one city. It's dozens, across countries, across decades, all following the same logic. Build the grid first. Wait for the people. There's something else in the archives. Survey maps from the 1810s and 1820s often show infrastructure that predates the survey itself. Streets are drawn as if they already existed. Dimensions are recorded with precision. Legal descriptions reference blocks that hadn't been settled. The maps don't say proposed. They say existing. In some cities, the grid contradicts the geography. Streets cut through steep hills. Avenues cross wetlands. The layout ignores natural obstacles as if the land was expected to be reshaped. And in many cases it was. Hills were leveled. Marshes were drained. Rivers were redirected. The grid took priority over the landscape. That's not normal urban evolution. That's something planned at a scale beyond immediate need. The timing is also compressed. Between 1800 and 1850, hundreds of cities in the United States and Europe adopted grid systems. The designs are remarkably similar. Rectangular blocks, wide avenues, standardized dimensions. It's as if the same planning logic appeared everywhere at once. The United States offers the clearest examples because the expansion happened so quickly. Cities appeared in decades, not centuries. And the infrastructure arrived even faster. The Erie Canal opened in 1825. It connected the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. It was 363 miles long. It required 83 locks. It moved more cargo in its first year than anyone predicted. But the canal wasn't built for existing demand. It was built for anticipated demand. And the cities along the route were planned the same way. Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Utica. All of them laid out grids before their populations justified the scale. All of them prepared infrastructure, warehouses, docks, streets, before the cargo arrived. Within 10 years, the population caught up. But the preparation came first. Railroads followed the same pattern. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad began construction in 1828. It was the first major rail line in the United States. The route was planned for freight volumes that didn't exist yet. Stations were built in locations with no settlements. Rail yards were designed for traffic that hadn't materialized. The infrastructure assumed a future economy. And then the economy arrived. By the 1850s, railroads crisscrossed the eastern United States. Every major city was connected. But the routes had been planned decades earlier, often before the cities themselves were fully built. The infrastructure predated the demand. Again, Britain shows the same logic. The Liverpool and Manchester Railway opened in 1830. It was designed to carry 400,000 passengers a year. In its first full year, it carried over 460,000. That sounds like good planning. But the line was designed before the demand was measured, before the industrial output justified it, before the population density required it. The railway assumed growth, and growth followed. Warehouses are another example. In the 1830s and 1840s, British port cities built massive storage facilities. Liverpool's Albert Dock opened in 1846. It was the largest enclosed dock system in the world. It could store goods for months. It had capacity far beyond Liverpool's trade volume at the time. The same thing happened in London. The Street Catherine docks opened in 1828. They were designed with advanced hydraulic technology and unprecedented storage capacity. For a shipping industry that was still growing, the docks assumed the ships would come. And they did. American grain elevators followed the same pattern. The first modern grain elevator was built in Buffalo in 1842. It could store 55,000 bushels of grain. Buffalo's grain trade at the time didn't require that capacity. But within a decade, the Erie Canal traffic justified it. And dozens more elevators were built, each one larger than the last. The infrastructure anticipated the volume. The volume followed the infrastructure. Municipal water systems show this too. Philadelphia's Fairmount Waterworks opened in 1815. It was one of the first large-scale urban water systems in the United States. It pumped millions of gallons per day. For a city of 100,000 people, that's over-engineered by any standard. But by the 1840s, Philadelphia's population had doubled. The system was already in place. New York's Croton Aqueduct opened in 1842. It delivered 90 million gallons of water per day to a city of 300,000 people. The per capita supply was far beyond necessity. But the system was built with future growth in mind. And the growth happened. Fire stations, police precincts, post offices, libraries. All of them appeared in the mid-19th century. All of them standardized. All of them built at a scale beyond immediate need. The administrative infrastructure arrived before the administration required it. In some cities, government buildings sat half-empty for years. In others, the buildings were completed before the departments they housed were fully staffed. The structures came first. The institutions filled them later. There's a consistency to the architecture too. Government buildings from the 1830s and 1840s often share design elements. Symmetrical facades, neoclassical columns, stone construction. These weren't regional styles. They were widespread patterns. Boston's Quincy Market, Philadelphia's Merchants Exchange, New York's Federal Hall. They look like they came from the same design manual. And in some cases they did. Architecture pattern books circulated widely. But the adoption was remarkably uniform. The same styles, the same materials, the same scale, across different cities, different regions, different economies. Prisons expanded rapidly in this period too. The Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia opened in 1829. It was designed for solitary confinement. It could hold 450 inmates. Philadelphia's crime rate didn't justify that capacity. But the prison was built anyway. And within 20 years, it was operating at full capacity. The same thing happened in Britain. Pentonville Prison in London opened in 1842. It was a model prison, designed to be replicated across the country. And it was. Dozens of prisons were built using the same design. Before crime rates required them. The capacity was ready. The inmates arrived later. Hospitals followed the same logic. Large urban hospitals appeared in the 1820s and 1830s. Massachusetts General Hospital opened in 1821. It had 73 beds. For a city with limited medical infrastructure and no formal healthcare system, the building assumed demand. And demand grew. By the 1850s, hospitals were overcrowded. But the initial construction had anticipated that overcrowding. The scale was planned ahead. Orphanages multiplied in this period. Between 1820 and 1850, nearly every major city in the United States and Britain built large orphanages. The buildings were enormous. The New York Orphan Asylum could house over 200 children. The London Foundling Hospital expanded repeatedly. But the orphan population didn't spike suddenly. The buildings were constructed before the crisis, almost as if the crisis was expected. Asylums grew at the same rate. Mental institutions appeared in nearly every state. The Kirkbride Plan, a standardized asylum design, was adopted across the country. The buildings were massive. Symmetrical wings. Central administration. Capacity for hundreds of patients. Most of them opened with far fewer patients than beds. But the beds were ready. There's a phrase that appears in city planning documents from this period. Anticipating future requirements. It shows up repeatedly. In canal proposals, railroad charters, municipal water plants. The phrasing is consistent. The logic is identical. Build now for a population that doesn't exist yet. Whether this reflects inherited systems, coordinated planning, or something else, the pattern is undeniable. The infrastructure came first. The population followed. And in the mid-19th century, this logic appeared everywhere at once. The word Tartaria appears in European maps from the 16th to 19th centuries. It referred to the vast territories of Central Asia, regions under Mongol, Turkic, and Russian influence. The term was geographic, not political. It described an area, not a unified empire. By the early 1800s, the label had faded from cartography. Russia expanded eastward. The Ottoman Empire contracted. New borders were drawn. The old term became obsolete. But the name persisted in some records. And in recent years it's been reinterpreted. The modern use of Tartaria isn't historical. It's interpretive. It's a lens through which people examine infrastructure anomalies, architectural consistency, and timeline compression in the 19th century. The question isn't whether Tartaria existed as a civilization. The question is why so much infrastructure appeared so quickly, and why it often preceded the populations it was meant to serve. There are three interpretations. The first is standard history. Industrial optimism drove urban planning. The 19th century believed in progress. Cities speculated on growth. Developers built ahead of demand. When the population arrived, the infrastructure was ready. This explanation accounts for most of the evidence. It's supported by economic records, political ambitions, and documented city planning. But it doesn't fully explain the scale, or the timing, or the consistency. The second interpretation is inherited systems. Some researchers suggest that 19th century infrastructure wasn't entirely new. It was rebuilt, expanded, or repurposed from earlier frameworks. This doesn't require a lost civilization. It suggests that some urban patterns, transportation routes, and architectural principles were older than their official construction dates. Canals built along ancient trade routes. Rail lines following pre-existing corridors. Grids aligned with older land divisions. The infrastructure wasn't invented in the 1800s. It was formalized. The third interpretation is systemic planning. A coordinated effort, governmental, financial, or institutional, designed infrastructure at a continental scale. This doesn't imply secrecy. It implies organization, standardized designs, shared engineering principles, centralized funding models. The uniformity isn't accidental. It's structural. All three interpretations are plausible. None of them require conspiracy. None of them demand a hidden truth. They're lenses, ways of understanding the same evidence. The grid systems are real. The timing is documented. The scale is verifiable. What changes is the explanation. The year 1816 is worth revisiting. It's called the year without a summer. A volcanic eruption in Indonesia caused global climate disruption. Crops failed. Temperatures dropped. Famine spread across Europe and North America. The following decades saw an explosion of infrastructure development. Canals, railroads, hospitals, asylums, prisons, grids. Some researchers see a connection, a rebuilding effort, a response to collapse. Others see coincidence, industrial progress that would have happened anyway. The timing invites both readings. The infrastructure itself doesn't lie. The maps are real. The construction timelines are documented. The capacity mismatches are measurable. What remains uncertain is the intent. Was this speculative optimism? Inherited adaptation? Coordinated preparation? The evidence supports all three. Tartaria, as a modern term, is a metaphor. It's shorthand for a set of questions about infrastructure, timing, and scale. It's not a claim. It's a framework for observation. The name resonates because the questions are unresolved. Why did so many systems appear at once? Why were they built before demand justified them? Why do they share architectural and administrative patterns? The answers depend on which framework you accept. If you see the 19th century as purely forward-looking, the infrastructure makes sense. Cities planned big because they believed in growth. If you see continuity with older systems, the infrastructure makes sense in a different way. It wasn't new. It was formalized. If you see coordination, the infrastructure reflects organized effort at a scale history rarely discusses. None of these interpretations erase the others. They coexist. The evidence invites examination. The grids were laid before the populations arrived. The canals were built before the trade volumes justified them. The hospitals, asylums, and prisons opened with capacity far beyond immediate need. That's not speculation. That's documented. What it means, that's still open. The 19th century reshaped the world. Infrastructure appeared faster than population growth in nearly every industrialized region. The systems were standardized. The designs were consistent. The timing was compressed. Whether that reflects ambition, inheritance, or coordination, the pattern remains. The infrastructure came first. The people followed. And somewhere in that sequence between the planning and the arrival, there's a question that doesn't resolve cleanly. Why were so many cities ready before anyone lived there? The maps suggest an answer. The records suggest another. The timing suggests something else entirely. The question remains open.